Well, good morning and good afternoon to everyone. Welcome to today's National Soil Survey Center webinar. My name is Sean McVeigh, National Training Coordinator for the Soil Science Division and host for today's webinar, Effective Ecological Site Collaboration. This webinar is being recorded and all participants join the webinar in listen-only mode. You receive the webinar audio through your device's speakers. There is no telephone dial-in. If you are having audio difficulties, please check the various ways your computer speakers may be muted or have their volume set low, including the speaker adjustments available in the Adobe Connect interface. You can maximize your webinar experience in Adobe Connect by shutting down VPN and any other programs that might compete for bandwidth. This includes email and Microsoft Outlook and instant messaging in Skype. Please take a look at our webinar room layout. I have the content pods that allow you to ask questions, provide comments, and of course, view the webinar presentation. Please use the 4-arrow icon in the featured presentation pod that allows you to enter and exit the full screen view as you choose. To submit a comment or question for me or our presenter, use the Q&A pod and type in your question. I'll handle technical difficulties the best I can while hosting the webinar and interact with our presenter to answer your questions during the verbal Q&A period. So I want to thank Joel. I just want to thank you, Joel, for being here to support our webinar and introduce our presenter, Jamin Johansson. Joel, I'm going to turn the webinar over to you so you can introduce the topic and our presenter.
Okay. Sean, I've got to tell you I'm a bit disappointed. I thought I was going to have my picture on live because I wore like a brand new shirt I got for Christmas and I look really good in it.
We can fix that for you if you really want to be on there, put you on video.
That's okay. We'll probably be better off with me not being in the picture. Welcome everyone, and thanks for taking time to attend today. I think you're going to be really impressed with the work that's presented here. Not only the examples of the accomplishments, but also some of the thought that's gone into the approach that Jamin Johansson is going to be presenting. I wanted to start out just quickly with kind of a more or less a justification for taking these different kinds of approaches, and in particular, get across the idea that this is, we typically think of doing ecological sites with a lot of field work and a lot of data collection and a lot of data analysis and so forth, and there's certainly that element to it. But the reality of what we're presented with in order to accomplish what we want to do with ecological sites, which is provide a basis for conservation decision-making, planning, and implementation. There's a lot to know. I mean, an ecological site and an ecological site description is really the only tool out there that attempts to integrate a spatial and temporal dynamics into a management decision-making framework. This classification systems don't do that. Classification systems typically take static properties and organize them, and they don't necessarily focus on interpretation. So what we're trying to do really is different than the other tools or the other classification systems that are out there. Collectively, and when I say collectively, I mean the whole partnership world that we exist in, we know a lot. We have experiments, we have structured and casual observations, we have modeling results, and we have theory. And all of these things have value. Unfortunately, over the history of developing ecological site descriptions, we've oftentimes focused on an individual site and how to, and doing one ecological site, getting it to be the very best that we can, and we haven't really focused on the ideas of organizing all of our information, testing and refining ecological sites, and that has led to inconsistent, frequently redundant, and often confusing interpretations. So I think what Jamin's going to present today, as well as some of the succeeding efforts in this webinar series, and I would certainly encourage anybody that's got an example of how it works, and it doesn't have to be perfect, even if if you've got something you tried that didn't necessarily work out the way you thought it would, and you want to get that out there, let us know and we'll get webinars organized. But what we really need is a host of different tools and techniques to encourage collaboration and improve the cost effectiveness of our ecological site efforts. If you have been paying attention to what's been coming out of USDA and Secretary Perdue's office, it's all about customer service and delivering information to people. And that's really where we want the ecological site work to fit, as well as everything else that we do. So with that, I'll start the seminar or webinar and turn it over to Jamin Johansson.
Thanks, Joel, for that introduction and for kicking off the webinar. Thanks, Sean, also for facilitating this. I am Jamin Johansson. I'm an Ecological Site Specialist in Dover, Foxcroft, Maine, where I've been the past 3 years. I spent the previous 7 years as an Ecological Site Specialist in Utah in Region 12 prior to moving out here. And I want to talk today about collaboration because I think it's important. And Joel touched on a lot of the main points that I think are coming to the forefront of why collaboration is going to be important. So today, I wanted to hopefully generate some discussion about how our current ecological site collaboration efforts are across the country, and hopefully get us talking a little bit more about this topic. And also, I don't consider myself an expert on the subject by any means, but I do hope that the information that's presented today will encourage you to seek more and better ways to collaborate effectively. Hopefully some of the tools and insights presented here today will help you engage in some of these collaborative projects moving forward. I just want to make some quick acknowledgments here. Many of the photos that you'll see were actually submitted by people who participated in a collaborative ecological site workshop in 2013 in Oklahoma City. And since that time, many of these ideas have evolved and been contributed particularly by Dr. Maria Fernandez-Jimenez, who's a social scientist and ecologist from Colorado State University. And the workshop in 2013 about collaborative ecological site development was summarized in a paper that is cited there at the bottom of your screen if you want to learn more about that workshop. But today I wanted to start with a brief introduction about the nature of ecological site work. NRCS is engaged in ecological site work because, as Joel mentioned, resource managers and landowners require access to reliable ecological information. Ecological site descriptions are intended to meet the need for accessible and reliable information, and NRCS is investing significant resources in developing ecological sites. Basically, the workflow of ecological sites is a pretty straightforward process of capturing as much good data as you can, organizing that data in a usable format, and then delivering the ecological information for the end users. However, we do have some flexibility in how we go about capturing, organizing, and delivering ecological information. So today I'm going to suggest that by integrating more collaboration into our processes, we can in fact improve the speed and quality of ecological site development. So let's take a moment to consider the following. Who might you partner with? Just imagine for a minute people in your area that you might partner with or hope to partner with in order to capture additional ecological data. This could be pre-existing data or perhaps new data collection in conjunction with some other agency or project that they have going on. As you think about the people that you might collaborate with to collect data, what is it that you can offer that agency in return for them sharing their data and resources with NRCS? And we'll talk more about that in a second. Now take a moment to think about who you might partner with to evaluate, organize, and analyze your data. Is it the same person or agency that you thought of for data capture and collection? If so, that's perfectly fine, but in some cases you might find that people with different skill sets are better suited for different roles in the ecological site development process. And finally, is there somebody or some group that you might think would help you deliver a more polished and more credible ecological site document? Do you think that any of those people that you just thought of would be interested in collaborating with you on this ecological site development project? If so, throughout this presentation, I'd invite you to keep those people in mind and consider ways that you might engage them specifically in your own ecological site development efforts, whether in your office or whether you're an ecological site specialist yourself. If you haven't been able to think of anybody, or you're not sure anybody would be willing to collaborate with you, I would submit that you'll probably be surprised at how many willing collaborators there are in your area if you make an effort to engage some of these folks in your work. So I want to start by talking about the nature of ecological site work and the ecological site framework itself as being the true strength of the NRCS ESD program. I didn't ask Joel to highlight that in his introduction, but it's perfect because I think that the unique nature of ecological sites, providing both spatial and temporal context for interpreting ecological observations, is our greatest strength for sharing and collaborating with willing partners. In fact, I'd say it's the best asset for somebody that's seeking to promote ecological site collaboration. And here's what I mean for those who may be less familiar with the ecological site framework. For any observation that you may have, you can locate or figure out an ecological site concept that defines the environmental parameters that are most similar to the observation that you've made on the ground in terms of soil properties, climate, geology, geomorphology, and hydrology, all of these things that really make an ecological site what it is. When you make an observation, you can understand the spatial context of that observation by using the land resource hierarchy to identify which MLRA you're in, and land resource unit if applicable, and then the ecological site group or ecological site that you're interested in. That gives you spatial context for your observation. Next, we use a state and transition model to define the temporal context of our observation. So on that type of land, there may be multiple types of ecological states or conditions. And by understanding the ecological condition that your observation is in and how it compares to other possible states that may occur on that same ecological site, you can get an idea of the temporal history and disturbance history of that site and where it is in space and time. That's what I think Joel meant when he was talking about the unique position that we are in by having a framework for organizing ecological information both spatially and temporally. And because we have this unique framework, we're able to make interpretations of our observations in terms of ecosystem services, conservation and restoration practices, and any other interpretation that we may want to make based on the spatial and temporal context of that. And that allows us to compare our observation and our area of interest to other areas of similar ecological sites and ecological states. So the ecological site framework provides a means for resource managers to quickly and easily find the most relevant information for their area of interest. Now, the scope of ecological site work is tremendous. Imagine there are thousands of ecological sites across the country, and each ecological site may have many ecological states to describe. And each ecological state can be described by many different ecosystem services in that ecological state and by many conservation and restoration practices in that particular situation. So the workload is immense and can't be completed in a vacuum. But by engaging collaborative partners and leveraging their resources, NRCS can improve the quality and efficiency of ESD development. And in my experience, collaborators are interested in partnering with NRCS because they want to use our ecological site framework to help them organize their data and fulfill their own responsibilities to manage or study ecosystems. So I would suggest that your ability as an ecological site specialist to explain the ecological site framework simply and effectively to collaborators is your best asset for establishing collaborative partnerships in your area. You need to be able to articulate what it is that we have to offer, and this is what we have to offer, the spatial temporal framework. So let's jump in now to collaboration and take a minute to just sort of get on the same page. What is collaboration? When I'm talking about collaboration, the dictionary definition is to cooperate with an agency or group with which one is not immediately connected. And that definition is fine, but for me, it doesn't quite capture my experience with ecological site collaboration. So I've come up with the following definition based on the root word of collaboration, which is labor. Labor implies physical or mental exertion, especially when difficult or exhausting. The prefix co means together with others, and the suffix ation means a process or act. So collaboration is the process or act of physical and mental exertion together with others. I don't know about each of you who may have collaboration experience, but I find this definition to be a much better expression of my experience with ecological site collaboration projects. Collaboration is hard work. Sometimes it feels like an unnecessary burden, and I think it would be important for us to consider briefly why collaboration is so difficult. And it's about people. Collaboration is difficult because it's about working with people, which is hard. People think in different ways and about different things. People in the organizations have different goals and strategies than you have. But understanding people and the way they think and act requires energy, and aligning and clarifying mental models, ideas, and even sometimes simple words can seem like more work than it's worth. And I know it can be exhausting and it's difficult because we all tend to think and talk about things in slightly different ways. And that's just because we're all different. And because we're different, collaboration requires an open mind and a learning attitude. That means change. Most of us resist change because it's hard. We have to be open to the ideas, goals, and strategies of others, and that makes us vulnerable. So we have to ask ourselves, are we willing to question our own assumptions? If so, are we willing to change our own thinking? That's difficult for most people. And sometimes it just seems easier to move forward with your own ideas rather than taking the time and energy needed to listen to someone on your team. So I would suggest before engaging in collaboration that you seriously consider whether you're willing to be open and be introspective for a minute and think about how willing you are to learn from other people and possibly even change the way you were thinking. This might be easy for some people, but for others it is difficult. And for all of us, it's critical for successful collaboration to have a learning attitude and be willing to learn and change your thinking based on input from your collaborative team. So what makes collaboration worth all this extra effort anyway? I mean, why should I even try to collaborate if it's going to be so much work? Well, collaboration is powerful for the exact same reasons that it is difficult. Since people and organizations think differently, team members can learn from one another in ways that cannot be achieved alone. Someone will propose something that you never thought of before, or say something that sparks a new idea that clarifies your own thinking. If you and your entire team maintain a learning attitude, something remarkable happens. In my experience, effective collaboration creates synergy. That is, the ideas from two or more people can be worth exponentially more together than both ideas separately. In other words, the whole becomes greater than the sum of the parts. As in this mathematical, let's see, where's my little, there it is. Oh, I guess my green arrow is not working, so cancel that. As in this mathematical expression here. But the degree of symmetry achieved by your team is a function of your team's commitment to learning from one another. It's also a function of your team's competence, but even a team of relative beginners at ecological site work can achieve symmetry if they're all committed to learning from one another. And synergistic collaboration can occur at any time. It can happen through any medium of communication, in person, over the phone, email, and it can happen through any phase of the ecological site development process. And for me, it's the most exciting part when I've been thinking about something and haven't quite figured it out, and one of my team members mentions something offhand that all of a sudden the light bulb goes off, and we solve a problem together, and we move forward in a new direction that wasn't possible before. So how do collaborative teams come together? Well, here's a few ideas. I think they could probably come together in any number of ways, but the best way to initiate collaboration is to simply share your work. This can be done at professional conferences, which is where a lot of my collaborations originally began, but also local workshops. When I first arrived in Maine, for example, our conservation districts put on a workshop for foresters, and I didn't know anything about forestry really, so I went to learn mostly and realized through listening to all of their presentations that what everybody was really hoping for and needing was ecological sites. They all kept saying how they needed a baseline of information to understand, their data. So I asked the conservationists if I could make a little an announcement, or so to speak, at the end of the workshop, and I got up there with a little handout that thankfully I put together describing what ecological sites are, and just passed out the piece of paper, a 5-minute talk, and I had a bunch of people come up afterwards and just mention that they were interested in that, and that they were willing to have us come to their property and collect ecological site data, which is huge out here because it's all private property. So local workshops and regional conferences can be just as effective. Technical teams, hopefully we're all working with our technical teams, but that's a great place to start, is finding out who in your technical team is excited about it and who do they know that might be excited to collaborate with you. And then you can always email and call other people who are doing similar work, who are putting out papers or presentations, people that you hear about that might be interested in what we're doing. Ecological site collaborations can also be of varying duration and formality. So I've been a part of ecological site projects that are very formal, they're funded, they have MOUs, they last for years, and I've been a part of some that are sort of week-long projects. And it's a simple collaboration where somebody has data and they want to interpret it by ecological site. Well, I can help you assign the ecological site if you can share your data that's going to my descriptions. And we sit down for a week or whatever and collaborate. And I've had some great experiences with those sort of small, short collaborations. And sometimes they produce big results and great data that somebody else has collected and they're willing to share. What I would warn, though, my last point here is that not all collaborations are a good fit. So you should communicate with your supervisor and otherwise people and be judicious about when and with whom you collaborate. Remember that everyone on the team, a collaborative team, needs to be open to learning for it to be, or at least to achieve a lot of synergy and a lot of exciting developments. And so be judicious about who you collaborate with and when you do it, what you commit yourself to do. So I want to share just a little bit of the results from a survey that we collected. A colleague and I solicited a few years back the Ecological Site Specialists and NRCS leadership at the time to find out who was working on collaborative ecological site projects across the country. And we identified 16 different projects and conducted a survey to find out more about the makeup of these collaborations. So as you can see in this table, NRCS, the top row, collaborated with all 16 projects, and the columns represent different roles that agency filled in the project, and note that the highlighted cells in dark blue represent roles that group or agency filled in the majority of the projects that they were involved in. So if we look at NRCS in particular, we can see NRCS participated in all 16 projects, which is good. And they usually contributed to many of the roles, except for project funding, direct money for that project. Keep in mind that there was likely more than one NRCS employee filling these different roles, but we don't know for sure from the survey which NRCS positions filled which of these roles. However, from my experience, I would say that the NRCS Ecological Site Specialists tend to serve as project coordinators on the collaboration. Even if there's another principal investigator involved, often it's the Ecological Site Specialist that facilitates communication, data management, and oversees some organization and really tries to make things smooth, because we've got a lot of skin in the game, I guess. If you look at a couple of the other agencies really quickly, the ARS, the Agriculture Research Service, and universities participated in 10 of the projects each, and they provided similar roles to each other, as well as USGS, which really, academia represents a pretty significant group currently collaborating on ecological site projects. And it should come as no surprise that they provide scientific expertise as well as data analysis and interpretation of results. A quick look at some other federal agencies and state agencies. Excuse me. And we can see that they've contributed significant time, knowledge, equipment, even funding in some cases, and data, et cetera, to the ecological site development effort. A lot of these resources essentially represent added value to NRCS without added cost. In other words, as Joel was alluding to, ecological site development is expensive, and our staffing is not particularly high. It's not commensurate with the level of work that needs to be done. But by engaging these other agencies and whatever roles they can fill, it's added value. It's leveraged effort. And so I suggest that we've done a pretty good job at engaging the other federal and state agencies, at least as of this survey. But you might notice that the private sector, landowners, NGOs, private contractors, they have not been involved in as many of the projects. And so perhaps there's a good explanation why NRCS hasn't partnered as well with the non-government folks. But I think perhaps we just haven't done as good a job at reaching out and connecting with these people in the private sector. I do have a recent experience on a collaborative project here in Maine that has really opened my eyes a bit to the potential for involving more of the private sector folks in the ecological site development. And but perhaps one of the reasons that there was not as much private sector involvement was because when this survey was done 4 years ago, most of these projects were in the western United States, which has a lot of public and government-run land. Now that I'm in the eastern United States, I'm realizing that there's a lot more private and non-government agencies doing a lot of the work. And so I just want to talk for a minute about a recent collaboration that I've had here in Maine called the Northwoods Project. And it began before I arrived here. In 2012, it's been about a 5-year project, and the purpose of the project was for the group to help NRCS develop ESDs, and especially they wanted state and transition models for use on national wildlife refuges. So the leadership was provided by the U.S. Fish and Wildlife Service, and they provided funding as well as expertise. The other collaborators that were important were a nature-cert ecologist, and she did much of the writing for the state and transition models and did a lot of the initial draft ecological site concepts early on. And then the natural areas programs for both Maine and New Hampshire, who collected vegetation data as well as offered their expertise on site concepts and review of concepts. The Maine NRCS soil scientists and ecological site specialists, and then the Vermont NRCS soil scientists collected soil data. I arrived on the project really in 2015 and learned really quickly that the project had a lot of good things going for it and a lot of challenges. And so a quick summary of those. The biggest challenge for this project was the turnover. We had 4 retirements and 2 job changes in 4 or 5 years. And then the second most major time sink was the data sharing and data management. We had several different agencies and people collecting field data. And there was data collected initially that was a certain kind of reconnaissance data, and data collected later that was higher intensity data. And what do we do with all this data, and how do we merge it with soils and photos and GPS points? That turned out to be a major time sink. When I came to the project, it was scattered all over the place, and it became my job to collect and organize it all. Really, that is my job. And I think the Ecological Site Specialist's job is to really coordinate and try to unify the group for those purposes. And then the third challenge, which I think is always going to be a challenge, is communication. Clarifying roles and goals of this project was a constant theme. But we had some keys to success. I think in this particular instance, our communication was very good. It was labor intensive, but we met regularly, we listened, people spoke their mind, and I think people were open-minded, and we were successful in that regard. We had great leadership. The U.S. Fish and Wildlife Service knew what they wanted. They wanted ecological sites, and they stayed the course, and they kept the funding going, and they had administrative support. And the rest of the group also got administrative support, so that all participants worked with their supervisors to ensure the project received necessary attention. And then finally, what were the outcomes of this case study, or of this project? So we had 13 ecological site descriptions with state and transition models have been developed to the approved standard. This is an area where there were no ecological site concepts at all prior to this project, and the provisional ecological site project was just completed in 2017. And so 13 of those provisional sites can now undergo the quality control review or then the quality assurance review for the approved standard. This includes 172 data points with photos, soils, and veg data, plus other reconnaissance points. We came up with higher quality ecological sites than the rest of the MLRA. One of the most important outcomes is that the wildlife refuges are committed to use these ESDs, and we have improved working relationships across the board for future collaboration. So returning to the survey then, I just want to spend a moment talking about how the survey respondents viewed the benefits, the challenges, and the keys to success of their collaboration projects. So the perceived benefits in the survey, the most important was improved working relationships. 9 out of the 16 surveys suggested that the collaboration improved the relationships, and 6 suggested that because of the ecological site project, the application and increased use of ESDs was a benefit. In other words, people that actually helped develop the ecological sites were more likely to use them because they were part of the project. I won't read these quotes, but essentially you get the idea. Of the challenges, data management was the #1 cited challenge for survey respondents. 7 comments about the quality and compatibility or database problems, and I'll read this quote. It says, these quotes, there are 3 different quotes here. A lack of integrated interagency database, large data sets and infrastructural needs, and sharing large amounts of historic data were all cited as major challenges. Another oft-cited challenge that I think is important or worth highlighting was aligning different ideas and goals about ecological site concepts and about the project. So differing ideas about what ecological sites are among agencies and differing priorities and goals among agencies is a challenge. Okay, so what were some of the keys to success identified on the survey? Involving the right people at the right time was the most cited key to successful collaboration, followed by communication and keeping an open mind. These keys cannot be overemphasized, I think, because they have to do with people and social skills. But successful collaboration ultimately comes down to our ability to interact socially and learn from one another. So to sum up, there's a few principles of collaboration that that I'd like to highlight. First, when collaborating, think of your own ideas as inputs, not outcomes. Second, listen to learn rather than to judge. Collaboration can occur in every medium of communication and at any moment. And then make sure you clarify concepts, roles, and goals often. So the take-home messages that I hope that you got out of this short presentation is that the ecological site framework for organizing information in a spatial temporal context is our primary collaboration asset as NRCS folks. You might be surprised at the number of willing collaborators in your area. Second, collaboration is hard work, but it can be fruitful, and synergy can come of it. Next, involvement equals commitment, meaning those who help develop ESDs are those most likely to use them. So if we don't involve people in the development of ESDs, the converse is also true. They're less likely to be committed to the concepts and actually use them. So let's engage everybody that we want to use these products. And last slide, take-home messages. You can get started by sharing your work. That's the best way. Open your mouth and talk to people about what you're doing, and then reach out to those who are doing related work in your area. In collaborative projects, ecological site specialists tend to coordinate efforts of the teams, and communication and organizational skills are vital. Ecological site specialists need communication and organizational skills to coordinate collaborative teams. Collaborators bring valued assets to aid the ESD development efforts. These can be time, expertise, data, you name it. All of these can be leveraged for additional value added towards our products. And finally, all collaborations are different, so choose wisely. Work with your supervisor to decide with whom and when to engage in collaboration. Don't collaborate for collaboration's sake. Do it with a purpose and an intent. And with that, I will close and I guess take any questions.
All right. Well, thank you, Jamin. And we'll give people a moment to compose their thoughts and enter their questions in the Q&A pod. I'll start things off with a question of my own. You talked about how our product is the spatial and temporal products. But I'm curious, in the collaboration efforts you've been involved in, were there any unintended or unusual benefits or uses of ecological site descriptions? And did that influence the content of those descriptions?
Unexpected uses. I wouldn't say that I've really seen so much unexpected uses, but it's really broadened. I guess it's broadened my mind about. Well, okay, I can give you an example. Maybe the most unexpected use that came out of a collaboration that I had with the USGS was actually sort of two collaborations that I was working on at the time. One was on Capitol Reef National Park, and we were developing their ecological sites. And then the USGS, I was collaborating for some other ecological site stuff. And then the park asked the USGS to help them design a monitoring method for endangered cactus species. And so the USGS contacted me and said, can you help us model where these endangered cactus might occur by, if we give you the locations of known cactus populations, can we use the ecological site to predict other potential locations for the cactus? So that was very unexpected, designing monitoring for endangered species. But, you know, it's not really outside the scope of what ecological sites can be done for, or can be used for. So but it was kind of unexpected for me. And the only thing that really changed in my mind was sort of the need, the more general need for, or in the ecological site description, not to call out endangered species, but to provide people with the better spatial information that they can just take like a shape file of the ESD or of the ecological site, and plug it in and make their own monitoring thing without having to go through me. That maybe we should use or should just make some spatial layers available, like people could just go download the ecological site shapefile, just like they would download a soil Sergo map. That's my experience. I don't know if that really is the best example, Sean, but maybe that gave
I think it's a good example because, you talked about the varied nature of all the partners that you brought in to collaborate with, and, you had to revisit what an ecological site was several times because everybody was coming at it from a different way.
Yeah.
So
Okay, well, good. Yeah, and I do think there's probably room for some of that, giving feedback back to NRCS about what our customers and users want and what they're really looking for in the ESD and what parts of the ESD maybe don't get used. And so where we could place our emphasis in developing them in the future through these collaborations.
Jamin, I got a question on who is funding these. I was thinking about that slide you had on who collaborates anyway, and it struck me that there weren't any big numbers in the funding column for any of those organizations.
Yeah, I think this is the picture that I see a lot of times with the funding, is that oftentimes nobody is really money's not really changing hands. Nobody's contractually obligated to anyone else. Now that's not always the case, but in a lot of the cases, I'm going to be writing ESDs anyway, and my partner is going to be collecting field data for their project anyway. And this other partner is trying to analyze data to get publications because they're in academia anyway. And so everybody sort of has their motivation in their own funding pool, and it's a mutually beneficial partnership. In other cases, like if you look at the Department of Defense, they were involved in 3 projects, and 2 of them they funded. And let's see, who else? The National Park Service was involved in 4 projects, and 3 of them they funded, and I think I mentioned Capitol Reef. I'm not sure. I don't think that one was part of this survey, but there are agencies that do have formal MOUs, and they want an ecological site product, and they write up a contract, and they're going to pay this person and that person and that person and that agency to do these different parts of the ESD. In the Northwoods case study that I presented, the Fish and Wildlife Service got an annual sum of $50,000 to pay NatureServe, and NatureServe then subcontracted with the Natural Heritage Programs to collect their data. We didn't receive any money, we didn't give any money, but the other players were getting some of their expenses paid. But they were donating a lot of time just to review and meet and those kinds of things. So I think any money that is spent tends to get stretched and leveraged pretty well so that it's pretty effective. But I don't think NRCS hardly ever puts direct funding. Well, I guess 4 out of 16, so maybe a quarter of the time, put some direct funding right into the project.
All right, we got a question here in the room with me, Jamin.
Do you have any experience with ESDs and cropland? And what do you think is the future for applying ESDs to traditional agriculture?
I mean, I can give my opinion on that. I don't know if Joel wants to chime in with sort of more the official stance. as a field office person, I can see a very general use in terms of sort of suitability, land type suitability for cropping and different cropping systems, and then maybe references and links from like a state and transition model. If you're familiar with the state and transition model, you may have a cropland state that says this land is suitable and has been used for cropland, and it may be good for, root crops or row crops or whatever. Those might be indicated, but then linked to agronomic tools and resources. So I don't see the ESD really containing and outlining the agronomic practices, but I could see there being a placeholder there that folks could then link to if they were breaking out new land, or actually the converse is probably more likely, where they have cropland and they're looking at the state and transition model and saying, well, I want this to revert to forest or range or pasture, and they're trying to figure out how to go from cropland back to maybe some more native species or maybe a timber rotation or something. I think it has a role, but it shouldn't overtake it. I don't know if Joe's probably not on the phone anymore, but
yes, I am, Jamin.
Oh, there you go.
Good question, Curtis. Thank you. There's a couple of different aspects to the application of ecological site principles to cropland. One is, we've got a really pretty well-developed history and application in these programs that we've had, for almost 100 years now, where we take abandoned cropland and reseed it, either soil bank or CRP or something like that. And I think, a lot of that land that's out there that we don't necessarily pay that much attention to the legacy and the historical legacy of a particular piece of land. In some parts of the country, the southern plains, North Texas, that particular piece of land may have gone in and out of crop production several times, and it may have been abandoned once and come back, or it may have been reseeded. And in that case, it's really critical to include the cropland interpretations, cropland state, as a part of that state and transition model. If you think you're going to restore pollinators, and as one of our main objectives on a lot of CRP ground, obviously we need to have a different seeding mix interpretation than if we just want to restore forage production. So yeah, that's a really critical component there. In other areas where cropland is kind of the dominant of some of these map units and components, there are a lot. We don't have good examples of what the reference communities should be, so we're going to have to use the state and transition models as well as the kind of the ecological information that we have to help people get some kind of grasp of what they could do with that piece of land. As a lot of this land changes hand, goes from fairly highly productive cropland in the Corn Belt, some of that land is actually winding up in the hands of people or institutions that want to reestablish native species out there. And I won't say native vegetation because it's hard to reestablish a native ecosystem, but what is it that we're going to plant out there to get that land use conversion that we want? And then finally, just the interpretations that we have of going from different management systems on cropland. We've been forced to take a little bit different approach on this. Typically we look at different states on cropland as different management systems, and I think from a public agency perspective and a program perspective, we have to look at what we think are different states on cropland and say, well, they may be different states from the standpoint of the managers in terms of how they produce the crop or whatever, but are they really different states hydrologically? Are they really different states in terms of the way they energy flow? Or are they really different states in terms of how the nutrients cycle within those systems? And if those things don't change, then by definition, there really aren't different states. We may want to break them into different states if there's a big enough of a management implication, but it sort of made us go back and rethink cropland and even pasture land in terms of, are these really different states just because we manage them differently? I think that's very important for our interpretations with regard to the off-site effects and the interactions with other sites. Thanks.
All right, Jamin, we have some questions about analysis in the Q&A here. So Joe is asking, I would like to have a go-to person to help me use PC-ORD. Is there one?
Yeah, I don't know if Ken Space wants me to advertise that, so, but yeah, he tends to be the go-to person.
He's the one that teaches that course, right?
Yeah, and he's always helped me, very, very readily. So, now if you're looking for sort of a local person, then I imagine there's probably some researchers in your area that know PC-ORD as well, university or elsewhere.
And can you talk about some of these analysis features like regression analysis in ArcPro?
I can't. I have never done that. Yep, sorry, Joe. I don't know that one. Let's see, Chris.
Does the use and future of ESDs reside in the interpretation? In other words, field office conservation planning?
Well, I can't see the future. I tend to think that the direction that ESDs will go depends on how accessible and how much quality we can get the information. I mean, if we have an accessible database that anyone can get on and in a few clicks get to the information that they need and it's reliable information, then I don't think that it has to be dependent solely on interpretations for field office conservation planning. Yes, interpretations for resource management in general, but I think we can have a broader base and a broader customer base if we can produce quality information that's accessible and reliable. Other people will go there. They're clamoring for it, but I think people maybe could get impatient if we can't pull it off. So, that's why I think collaboration is so important, because maybe there's not a ticking time bomb, but it does seem like we have a certain time frame we need to get this stuff out that we need to work toward, and I think collaboration can help us do that so that more people will use these sooner and keep them relevant.
Well, Jamin, this has been a really good example of how if you want to go quick, you work by yourself. If you want to go far, you work with other people. So thank you, Jamin and Joel, for your time and effort to make this presentation today. And thanks to all the participants for joining in. We had well over 100 people join today's webinar. The on-demand recording for this webinar will be available on our National Soil Survey Center YouTube channel within a couple of days, so feel free to let your colleagues know about this training opportunity. This concludes our webinar presentation.